Shall we start now?
Yes, we are good to go live.
Shall we start?
Sure.
Okay, I'm audible properly. Kiran bhai?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good afternoon and warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This webinar is arranged by the Center of Excellence in Finance and Risk Management, and the webinar is on smart investing in current pandemic. And our guest, Mr. Virendra Somansi, Managing Director and CEO of Motilal Oswal Private Wealth Management, will interact with us on the impact of COVID-19 on people's finances, their investments, and find solution for the same. Mr. Virendra Somansi leads the wealth management business at Motilal Oswal Financial Services Limited. He brings over with him over 22 years experience across the financial service sector. Mr. Somansi is an MBA from Symbiosis Institute of Business Management and has also done BE in Mechanical Engineering from Government College of Engineering. His last stint was with Bob Capital Market as head wealth management and equities for a span of 2.5 years, in which he has built the industry's first scaled up wealth management and business segregating advisory and distribution into different legal vehicles. Before Bob Capital Market, Mr. Somansi has worked for more than 17 years at Citi, in which he had long and successful record of scaling up the retail banking and wealth management franchises in India. In his last role with Citi, he has the country head of Citi Wealth Advisors and has served for a short duration with the regional wealth team Singapore. He also served as a director of the board of Citigroup Global Market India Private Limited, as the head of the managing committee of Citi Wealth Advisors. And apart from work, Mr. Somansi is an avid marathon runner. So I welcome you, sir, on behalf of the entire team of Adani Institute of Infrastructure Management. And before we start, sir, let me quickly give you a brief background on the Center of Excellence in Finance and Risk Management. So this center we started at Adani Institute of Infrastructure Management in 2015, and it was formerly known as Center of Financial Reporting and MIS. Then thereafter we restructured the center in the last year. And currently center is focusing on developing cases and do capacity building activities in the area of financial reporting, financial planning and analysis, cost and performance management, risk management, private equity and venture finance. And center has also come out with the publications in reputed journals like Journal of Private Equity and Malaysian Accounting Review and so on. Center has also successfully conducted 3 programs on finance for non-finance executives in the last academic year. And presently the center is engaged in delivering 2 MDPs on finance for managers to the senior and middle level executives of Adani Group. So for the participants, a little housekeeping before we get started. So participants, if you have any questions during the presentations, please type them into the question or message box. We will bring them up during the presentation, and we will also have the time for questions at the end. So now, without further excitement, we will turn the time over to our guest, Mr. Somansi. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Amit Bhai, and thank you very much for the entire team at Adani Institute of Infrastructure and more particularly the Center of Excellence in Finance and Risk Management for giving us the opportunity to connect to the talented bunch of students of the institute. It is always a pleasure to talk to the students because one, a lot of vibrancy, enthusiasm, and the energy levels which the student exudes, it brings in a lot more positivity for all of us who cross that age. And 2 is to most importantly, share some of the insights what we have, and in turn also learn the new insights which students have. Ideally, I like to do the in-person seminars because you can have an eye contact with these students and get to understand them better and deliver it more personalized. But I think this is what customization is, and this is how all of us have to adapt to the new normal. And since this is the new normal, very happy to conduct this webinar and take everybody through the topic which we have chosen today. I'll just take 1 second to share the Is the screen visible now?
Yes, yes.
It is, right? I'll just put it on slideshow. Okay, so coming back to our topic for today, the topic given to all of you is smart investing, and suddenly, you might get surprised of the title in my presentation is only simple investing insights. Now, the interesting thing about this is that, I'm going to share some of the very basic investing insights, which is true for all weather, all cycles, with or without pandemic. But the difference between simple investing insights and smart investing insight is the only one factor that, apart from the 4 things we'll talk today, the 5th thing which makes the simple investing smarter is human behavior. And I cannot but emphasize the importance of human behavior in the investing world. Many of you would have heard this story, and I would like to go back to in an era where the vehicles were not there, and there is this term called as New York fire horses. I don't know how many of you heard this story, that many years back, when there was a fire in any building, these fire horses were always kept ready, where the water tanks were arranged in a carriage, and the fire horses used to pull this water tank and get into the building. They used to jump into the building, and the people used to then splash this water tanker towards dousing the fire in the buildings. Over the years, the horses get trained, and that is how, because they don't then get scared of entering whenever they see a fire. In fact, whenever they see a fire, they were trained in such a way that they jump into the fire to ensure that there's not time left. However, like everything in life, there is a life for everyone, and as the horses get older, they were then moved out of the assignment of getting into the fire, and then these horses were used for normal passenger carriage. However, for all their life they used to do this job, and then this is the classic story, as they call in New York, as a New York fire horses story, that the passenger carriages, when they were doing their normal activity of moving the passengers from one station to another station or one location to another location, and by chance if there is a fire which is in and around, then the horses will automatically go towards the fire and try to jump into the fire. Now they are no longer in those roles or the jobs, but they've been conditioned so much in their life that behaviorally they can't avoid getting into the fire, right? And that's where the panic and the crisis happened with all the passengers, or what that is happening to the horses. Now, why this is important example is that it is no different for humans, right? As all of us know, our ancestors used to earn their basic bread and butter through cultivation, right? And at that point of time, when there was no sophisticated technology and GPS systems, the basic occupation was go and hunt in batches of people. So imagine 8-10 people going hunting in a forest, and one of them shouts and screams loudly, "Oh, there's a lion." I mean, the basic instinct was that everybody else will just run back faster than everybody else, right? Now, one of the smarter guys can also think that, oh, is there a lion which is there, or is it just some other noise which is coming? but nobody had the guts to do that, because what if there was a real lion? So the basic instinct was, when there was a crisis, just try to run away from the crisis, because it was survival instincts, right? Now, as humans, we continue the survival instincts so many centuries and decades later, because behaviorally that is exactly what happens when the crisis comes in. So let's go back to 6 months back, when this whole crisis in March and April happened. The first reaction when the stock market crash happens is, should we sell everything? Should we just get out of it, because maybe there is further bad news which is awaited, right? That is the first reaction, and that goes back to that, you can't blame ourselves, you have to blame our forefathers for the instinct. Now, this behavior is what really makes the difference between the simple investing and smart investing, right? And we'll come back to this later. For people actually who are very interesting to know about behavioral science, there are many books written, there are many authors who speak about it. And one of the books which I would recommend to all of you is The Art of Thinking Clearly, written by Rolf Dobelli. I'm sure many of you would have also read this book by now. Cool. So with that background, let's see what are we going to do today. So I'm going to talk for about 40-45 minutes, on the few slides which I have made for you all, and then we'll be happy to take some questions. So what are we going to talk today, right? I mean, you can see the slide. We are talking about 4 tenets of, what are the basic investing rules, right? And as you can see, the first rule is obviously, the right thing to do is diversify and rebalance. But all of us try to break the rule by repeatedly asking the question that which is the best asset class I should invest in, right? And we'll hear about it more. And then investing rule second is, should I invest with only high quality fund managers across all cycles? Or, I try to break the rule by investing in the best performing funds. Now we'll understand what do you mean by best performing funds and how does it, break the rule. And third is, all of us know that the best way to invest is, time in the market than timing the market. But in reality, what happens is all of us try to time the entry and exit. And that's where the difference between the investment return and the investor return happens. And we'll hear and see what is the best things to avoid there. And the last is, the golden rule of any investing is, if we could learn the game of buying low and selling high, we don't need to do anything else in life. And what typically then happens is, okay, should I exit when the funds are underperforming, right? So like the line says, these are the decisions, because if you look at each of them, there is a principle behind each of the vehicles. But what happens in reality is, all of us have different behavioral biases, right? And these biases then become inconsistent with our long-term goals. Okay, this is a slightly, a longish, trend of what typically happens. Like you see most of the, corporate balance sheets, and you hear, the results on a quarterly basis with various corporates. Imagine household balance sheet, is something like a corporate balance sheet. And then you relate it to what happens with the GDP growth going forward. Now, if you look at it, in the last 7 years before the crisis happened, which is, let's say between 2013 and 2020, the real private consumption expenditure has grown at an average of 7%. But if you look at the income levels, right, the disposable income levels have posted a CAGR of only 5.5%. So then how is this? So basically, this is also talking about Amdani Athani Kharcha Rupaiya. So who's funding that gap of 1.5%? And that gap, right, is actually a combination of higher household debt, which was taken in the last 7 years, and lower household savings. So at one end, the savings was lower, and therefore people borrowed more to spend even more than what their income level was. Now, this is the trend which also ensured that the consumption therefore goes at a much higher pace. Now, currently, because of the pandemic, obviously we are all seeing a bit of a stress income growth, and there is a cautiousness in the market, and behaviorally many things may change. But what is going to happen because of this is there will be tendency for, you know, more savings, right? And this household saving could massively shift towards financial savings. There's a larger macroeconomic thing happening, that there is financialization of savings happening, in the sense more people are now not investing into real assets like real estate and gold, but investing into liquid financial assets. So this might, you know, have a impact on the muted GDP growth in the next few years, and we've seen some part of it, you know, last quarter. So let's explore then, you know, what works and what does not work for all of us, right? So first question, okay, should I invest in equities or debt, right? And this is really the history of all the asset classes for the last, you know, many years since 1993. Now, as you can see, we have taken, you know, 5 asset classes. We have taken, you know, equity as an asset class to be, you know, and both we've taken investing in domestic markets in India and investing in the international markets in the US, you know, as 2 different, you know, sectors. And then we have, you know, gold, debt, and cash. Now, as you can see, there is no consistency of a particular you know, asset class which is consistently being the number one. If you look at 1993-94, you know, Indian equities did well. Then 1995-96, the US equities did well. But even if you look at the number 2, number 3 sectors, you know, gold, which was the second best performing you know, asset class in 93, became the worst performing asset class in 94, right? Or off late, if you look at the 4-year block from 2017 to 2020, which is, you know, the last 4th quadrant there, you will have in 2017, you know, the Indian equities did really well. In 2018, you look at the Indian equities was the worst performing among all the 5 asset classes, right? Gold, again, which was, let's say in 2017, the 3rd best performer, is looking to be in 2020 to be the best performer. So what is happening is, this is the history of so many years. There is no asset class which consistently is the number 1 asset class over a longer period of time. So the mix between the asset classes, you know, will keep changing. So what is the right thing for an investor to do then, right? So if, you know, and all of us are individuals which are unique in our own way, the right thing to do for all of us is to choose the right asset allocation plan, which suits all of us, right? If there is, you know, somebody like you who's young, and let's say in a few years from now you start earning, your risk appetite to invest into equity is much higher than, let's say, somebody who's at 70 years old age, who is now already retired, is looking at the last, you know, few years of his life and may not have the you know, appetite to absorb the volatility of equities. So for everybody, you know, you can choose what mix of asset class works extremely well. But this is, you know, clearly what we say, that a disciplined asset allocation, if you do across various asset classes, depending on, you know, your risk appetite, the returns which you get as, you know, a portfolio. Let's say we have taken a portfolio here. If you see the white blocks are a portfolio where there is an equal allocation done to each of these 5 asset classes. And as you can see from this graph, that the portfolio with a mix of all the 5 asset classes in the same proportion is never the best performing asset class, but it brings a lot more stability to the entire portfolio, and many few times it will be the worst performing, right? Now, if you look at it between 2006 to 20, you know, the portfolio return would be beating the average of all that. And here is, you know, if you see the bottom left chart, if you look at the CAGR from 1990 to 2020, you will see what are the returns for various asset classes, and then you'll see equal weighted portfolio. You know, if you exclude US equities and just distribute between the 4 asset classes of Indian equity, Indian debt, cash, and gold, you will get a 11.3% return. If you add US equities, maybe you will get 12.7%. But if you look at the individual performances, your gold will be 10.5%, your debt is at 8.6%, your Indian equity, let's say, is at 14%. But to get that 14%, look at the standard deviation of 28.6% for only equities in India. For US equities, it is 15%, whereas an equal weighted portfolio, the standard deviation drastically comes down to 8.8%. So what we are saying is that if you were to have an equal weighted portfolio, right, and you do a 1 year balancing, it probably gives you the least volatility and an average return of anywhere between, let's say, 10.9 to 11% over a 10-year, 5-year, 7-year period. The right-hand column, bottom, table, you can see the average returns for even a 5-year or a 10-year is anywhere between 10.9 to 10.8, right? Now, the beauty about this is that the volatility is the least on this portfolio compared to a particular asset class like we discussed. So I think the thumb rule here is that all of us have different risk appetite, different time horizons, and different ways of needs on liquidity. So we have to look at what is the best asset class for us to have a mix of somebody who's aggressive can have a higher equities and lower on the debt, but a disciplined approach on asset allocation, and if required you can do the balancing because your needs can change, the market valuations, the market factors can change. So that finishes the debate that there is no certain asset class which is necessarily always good. A mix of asset classes as per your risk profile will give you the most optimum returns, right? Okay, so now once we have agreed on, okay, there is I have to do an asset allocation and broadly invest in 3-4 asset classes, then how do I invest in the best of the funds? And this is really a question which we should also ask when we invest is, buying the best performing fund, has it worked across all the asset, all the number of years you stay invested into? And this is a study done for investments with a 3-year period, and if you look at it, these are the ranks of the number of schemes in that rank, right? And you will be surprised that the funds which you track in the year 1, and then if you were to look at it, okay, how are these schemes looking in the subsequent year, you will never see that the best performing fund of 1 year does not necessarily mean that it will be the best performing fund in the subsequent block of years, right? So I think this is one important thing. Okay, I'm getting an alert saying that there is a bad network quality. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, very much. No problem.
Okay. Okay, there's an alert which is coming to me. Okay. So, this is basically to showcase that the same best performing funds does not necessarily continue to be the best performing funds in the next subsequent block of years, right? So all of us, normally what we do is, whenever we want to invest, we look at the past track record of 1 to 3 years and say, oh, in the last 3 years, this fund has done the best performing returns, and let me invest into that. So here's a study of review period we've done over a longer period from, let's say, 2000 to 2017, where we are saying that the top quartile funds, right? Let's say the 25% of the top quartile funds, if you were to invest and then judge their performance 1 year from that time, how are they ranked? So you realize that the top quartile funds in the first quartile, if you see, when you look at their performance up to 1 year, only 36% of them continue to come to quartile 1, and a 2/3 part of the funds then get into the quartile 2, quartile 3, and quartile 4. Now, if you do this over a longer period of, let's say, even 3 years, right, which is you invest in the top fund basis of 1 year performance, but you look at their quartile performance 3 years later, is the same thing. Only 33% of the funds remain in quartile 1. Now, if you do these investments basis the 3-year performance and look at the quartile rank even after 3 years, the statistic does not change. So the learning here is that only 1/3 of the funds remain the top performance in the next quartile, right? And hence, whichever fund is doing well in this quartile does not necessarily mean that in a year later that will happen. So what we are trying to showcase here is that good consistent performance happens over a longer period of time, right? Like this slide, if you can see, this is one of our Motilal Oswal's, value PMS strategy. And you look at it, if INR 10 was invested way back in March 2003, over a period of time, it would have moved to about 267, right? With a CAGR of about, 20.7%. Now, if you look at the short-term variations, and you can look both at Nifty and the blue chart, which is the value PMS, it will have volatility because of various situations, various conditions in the marketplace, right? But you should look at it that actively managed fund over a longer period of time, right? So in this case, you can see 63% of the days, the value PMS is outperform on a 1 year rolling basis, right? So, but if you take it short-term performance of just one sector for a particular, okay, I will invest by looking at the last 3 years and then in the next 1 year I won't get returns. That's not the way equity works, because equity returns comes, on a exponential basis. This is also very similar on, HDFC equity fund, a very similar long-term performance of a fund. So, I mean, this was just to share with you that when we do financial planning and advisory for our clients, there is a 4C framework which we use. So we don't necessarily go what is the best performing funds of the past. What we do is we choose the best winning managers. And how do we choose the best winning managers? The winning managers are chosen basis, the 4C framework which is here. And then once the winning managers are chosen, then accordingly we look at, okay, which are the schemes of that winning manager we should look at. Okay, moving on to the third chapter, which is third lesson, which is, how important is staying long term in the market vis-a-vis trying to always time the market, for entry and exit. You would have heard many times somebody says, oh, I have got a tip and okay, this is the best time to enter, and then, what is the best time to exit. Now this is, as you can see from the chart, it basically shows that, if you were to stay fully invested in a particular stock, right? And in this case, we have taken, as Sensex over a longer period of 17 years. So you imagine that from January 2003 to July of 2020, for 17 years, if you were to stay invested into the markets, you would have earned annualized returns of 14.8% for a fully invested portfolio, which is the first bar on the left hand side, right? However, now look at various situations where you are not fully invested because, like COVID has happened, you have known that in the last 13 years we've had Asian financial crisis, we had global financial crisis, we had the September crash, we had many other events where the market was volatile. And if every time you try to time the market by getting in, getting out, there is no guarantee that you will come in at the lowest level and book profits at the highest level, right? So if you miss just the one best month of investment, look at your returns over the 17 years. Returns come from 14.8% to 13.2%, right? Now, if you miss the 5 best months, just look at what happens. Your returns actually come down to half. Just for a long period of 17 years, you just missed the 5 best months to invest, and your returns have come from 14.8% to 9.6%. Now, this is the value of staying invested in those 5 months over a longer period of 17 years. And okay, so what are the best months to invest? History suggests that 2 out of the best 5 months generally have occurred within 1.5 years of the 3 worst months, and at least we have market cycle when the global financial crisis happened, in April and May 2009, were the best months after, again, similar 2-3 periods in 2008 itself. So during the crisis, and we are now going through the, one of the worst crisis ever in the history, right? Even in 2008 was a financial crisis. This is more like a, health crisis, and we will have, continued volatility in the market. There will be questions whether, this trend will continue for the next 2 to 3 years. The Indian economy is not doing well, then how come market is going on the other side? This has happened in every single crisis, right? And this crisis is no different. So the key in investments is, not to time the market and be there for the longer term, because, return. So this is another example of what happens for a, let's say the large cap equity fund returns, right, is about, 18.7% over a pretty long period of time of 18 years. And look at when the money comes the maximum. The highlighted phase, there is this brownish phase which is highlighted in the graph. This is the, rolling 1 year basis Nifty 50 returns. And if you look at the AUM growth and the net inflows, typically what happens is, right, when the markets go down, suddenly you will have huge redemption pressure and, people start withdrawing money. And when people look at the past history and say, okay, now the markets are going up, let's start investing in a big way. So, look at the bottom graph, the maximum amount of funds have come when the performance of the fund was on the peak. Because you've seen, oh, this fund is really grown in the last 3 years now. This is the best time to invest because it has a fantastic track record of investment. So behaviorally, what happens, we don't stick to the market fluctuations which the fund goes through. We as investors will always try to time the market, right? And therefore, over a longer period of time of 18 years, the fund actually is given 18.7% return, which is almost 22x. But you look at the return of the investor. The investor returns are only 9%. So this gap, which is almost the 17x gap, is the outcome of the behavioral gap. And this is where your fund returns are lower than the investor returns. This is like saying that, okay, I can give a simple example that if there's an airline which is going, let's say at 50,000 square feet above the ground, as an example, and somebody says, no, the airline is at 50,000 square feet above the ground, but the passengers are only at 10,000 square feet above the ground. Because in reality, what happens is that, the airline is what it follows its own trend, but the passengers are getting in and out, right? And therefore, I mean, this is just to exaggerate what I'm trying to prove through this slide. And if you look at, this is just to exaggerate the same point which I'm saying through a, real data on the graph, that time reduces volatility. And if somebody really wants to, there's no magic formula to create wealth in the short term. Wealth creation happens really over a pretty long period of time. And this is really the, journey of Nifty 50 for 26 years, right? Now, this is the beauty. So let's take any example. Okay, let's take an example of this year. Let's say 2000, as you know, the .com crash happened. Now, let's say some unfortunate investor came and invested in the year 1. He had a 15% negative return. Year 2, another 15%, year 3, another 10%. But look at 4. Now, if this guy gets out in one of these 2-3 years, he is going to come with 100 rupees of investment and go out with much lower investment, right? This is CAGR returns. And if you look at the year 4, if he stays invested in the 4th year, he's made 6% annualized returns for each of the last 4 years, right? Now, if the same investor stays on the year 5, he's made 7% annualized return. So he's not only bridged the negatives of the first 2-3 years, He's actually turned positive and given 7% for the last 5 years. Now, this is exactly what happens over a longer period of time, because even if you have invested into the best of the times, the returns will, average out over a longer period. So if you see this graph, over a longer period of time, your returns are anywhere between 11 to 13%, right? If you were to invest at 1995, look at the number of years the return is negative. But over the last 26 years, this fund has given a return of 9% on a CAGR basis. And the fund in question is, you just invest into the Nifty index. Let's come down somewhere closer, 2015, right? 2015, again, the first 2 years were negative 4% and 1%. On the third year, you start getting 8% return. So 7%, 8%. So over a longer period of time, this reds will disappear and you will start making money over a longer period of time. Because, the longer you stay in the market, the higher is the probability of making money. And this table will show you that, look at this. For example, from here onwards, there's not a single observation where there is any negative return, right? So if you were to invest, this is 10 years, right? So if you were to invest in a market for 10 years, you will never ever lose money. In each of these 17 years, irrespective of whenever you invest, 10 years horizon, you will always make money. So there's not a single incident where you lost money over a period of 10 years. Now, if you come down to maybe smaller time of 5 years, there is 95% of the time you made money if you stayed invested for 5 years. But and obviously the longer you stay, then there is zero chance that you would have lost money in equities. This is another example of a HDFC equity fund. Again, very similar example of Nifty, right? So that is, what I had to talk about the third rule. Now let's move to the fourth rule. You had seen in the earlier example, there are many times when the funds are underperforming, right? So as a smart investor, what am I supposed to do, right? And this is a very simple way to put across all our behavioral biases, right? So when the market is now, and this is the, assume that this is the curve of, any equity market. So when, there is growth in the market, there is optimism, right? You invested here, let's say, with full optimism. Now there is excitement because the market has moved from here to here. Again, you become thrilled to see, oh, my last 4 years returns or 2 years returns have now started doing extremely well. And at the peak, there is euphoria. Now, obviously, we know that this is the peak only in hindsight, right? But because the market has shown this curve, there is highest interest here. The market is really hot and the interest is even hotter. So everybody thinks that this is the right time to invest because, look at the past trend, it is now going up only, right? In hindsight, this is always, the point of maximum financial risk. And then, okay, it starts going down. So you're a bit anxious. Oh, is it going to fall further or what? And then, it starts sliding and you say, no, it's going to come back faster. Then there is fear. And at this point, you really start becoming desperate that, look, I had invested here. It went all the way. I missed this whole rally and now my portfolio started coming down, right? And then you hit the panic button. And what happens at this point is really at the bottom point, there is complete depression. And then you say, oh, this is not going to go anywhere. I should redeem my portfolio, right? It's like the 5 fingers. If you see, this is the cycle of investments. So what happens is typically at this point, most people panic, and somewhere between this line, right, between the panic to depression, we lose the patience out and we, maybe stop, continuing the fund. And then again, the cycle continues of hope, relief, optimism. So in equity markets, this is a very natural phenomena. And, can you control this? The answer is no. If some of you have read this Stephen Covey's book of 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, it very clearly says that there is something called as the circle of competence, which means whatever is in your control is what you should do. What is not in your control, there's no point in worrying about it. And equity markets, we don't know. All the unknowns will happen tomorrow. Let's say there is a Pakistan can bomb India, which nobody knew when it will happen, right? It can happen. So equity markets will continue to be volatile. Our reaction to that is what makes a smart investor, differentiate from a average investor returns. So I just wanted to, quickly sort of sum it, saying that, okay, markets are cyclical. However, it's difficult to predict the length and the magnitude, right? Because the markets will keep going up and down. So like I was saying, this is very a simple graph, but how long this will go and how sharp the downside will be, and whether will be a V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped recovery, there are many factors which are impacting there, right? So what is the best way we should do if things are not in our control? As an investor, we should continue to figure out what is the best asset allocation for me as an individual, depending on my risk appetite, my time horizon, and my investment objective. And then say, okay, asset allocation, like I said, will tide you over the volatility. We also, expect many of our investors to actually put an investment charter, because the moment you put an investment charter, all your decisions then get documented. So what happens is you say, okay, I will want to have, investments into so many sectors, or I don't want to more than 5% in a single exposure stock. And then when the market cycles keeps changing, you stick to the basic discipline of what you have documented, so that the current scenario of market does not dictate the way you should react. And therefore, once we also have the documented thing, we also go back to our clients and say, look, this is what you had mentioned when everything was hunky dory, and we should stick to this discipline. That is where, I'm giving examples in March and April when this happened, when the panic happened, we went back to the clients with our investment charter and say, if you don't need money right now as per the charter, then you should ride the volatility. And from that bottom to now, it's a different picture altogether. And then you have to choose the right wealth managers, the fund managers, like I said, where you have different styles there are growth styles, there are value styles. So in a portfolio, you should have complementary styles of very good quality fund managers, and you have to stay put even if there is underperformance, because underperformance will happen for a shorter period of time. But like you saw in the past few slides, good funds with good fund management will continue to give good returns over a longer period of time. And you have to invest time in the markets. You cannot keep saying that, okay, I'll keep going in, going out, going in, going out, because if you miss the 5 best months over a 17-year time period, your returns have come down to half. So I think the simple message I would like to give to all of you is that, like Charlie Munger has actually said, investing is very simple, but it is not easy. And why he says it is not easy is because the rules are very simple, but our behavioral biases make it more complex. So the more simple you keep in your head and mind and behaviorally, the better it is. You would have also, heard Morgan Housel, who is one of, who's written a book very recently called as The Psychology of Money, right? Who's a avid writer on human behavior. Morgan also talks that in savings, you should be pessimistic, as if everything will go wrong today, right? So when you're saving, you should be very pessimistic, but when you're investing, you should be very optimistic. And to quote my last slide on what Warren Buffett really says, that we don't have to be smarter than the rest, but more disciplined than the rest. So you need a reasonable amount of intelligence, but the temperament is 90% of it, right? So you don't need to be really intelligent to figure out how to make money in markets. I think patience is a larger part of it. So so that's it from my side. Happy to take any questions if you want, if you have.
Yeah, so thank you. There is a question from Mr. Misha. So he's asking like, how has the IPO scenario changed in the pandemic? What about the CMS IPO?
Okay, so I'm gonna avoid specific stocks, but what happens is that the need to raise cash or the need to get more money is the highest when there is crisis, right? Now the challenge for people who want to raise money is that will they get the best valuations at that point up. So if the market mood is very depressed, then one thinks that, oh, if the market mood is really not that great, then for a company like mine, will I get the best valuation? And when the market mood is a bit euphoric, right, where because markets are forward looking, right? So if the forward looking view is that, okay, markets are looking forward and my business model is gonna get benefited over the next 2 to 3 years, and the current mood is euphoric, then you get better valuations. So you've seen some few IPOs coming now, right? I mean, the Happy Mind IPO was, one of the best post-market gains. The second best actually in the entire history. And then we have another 3-4 IPOs. Rosari Biotech was good. That also had a very good listing. We had 2-3 more IPOs which are already in the pipeline, which is will get listed in the next few days, and there are some more to come. Now, this is exactly what happens, that when there are euphoria, you will see the IPOs coming in. One question which I want to also preempt from others before somebody asks me, which many of our clients are asking, that if the GDP actually is going down, if the economy is not looking good, there is a lot more pain in the ground level, and why are the market scaling higher levels from where it is? I think a simple answer to that is the constituents of the GDP and the constituents of the markets are very different things, right? So as an example, when I say that 12% of the GDP is only reflected into the equity markets. So when you look at the GDP, it is past data. And when you look at the markets, markets are forward looking. So let's consider in the Q1, the GDP degrowth was almost 24%, right? The construction sector went down by 40%. The real estate went down by almost 25%. Now both these sectors have a zero representation into the Nifty 50 stocks, which means there is no listed stock in Nifty 50 which can represent a real estate or a construction sector. So how can the sector's pain then can get reflected into Nifty 50? Similarly, Infosys is one of the top stocks in the index. A large part of Infosys revenues comes from IT companies which are based outside of India, in the US and Europe and many other places. Now, because of the pandemic, let's say as an example, if people think that automation is the only way to go forward and I need to spend on technology more, and if Infosys were to get more orders, I mean, their stock is a reflection of what their model is. It will not reflect the pain which the textile worker or the textile business is going through in India. Because again, textile, another good example, that we don't have a single stock in textiles which is listed in Nifty 50, right? So one is markets do not have the entire representation of what is happening in the economy, because economy is a lot more unorganized. Markets are only about listed stocks. And number two, the composition is different. And three, there is only 10% roughly about the household saving which gets invested into equity markets in India. In markets like US, it's almost 45% of the household savings get invested into the equity market. So there's a lot of difference also of how much money actually goes in equity markets. So equity markets are a very small proportion of the overall economy. However, as smart investors, you'll always have opportunities on stocks which will benefit because of COVID. So there are sectors like all of us know, airlines, travel, tourism, these are the impacted sectors. But there are many other sectors which actually positively get benefited, of the markets. So to give you a few examples, the pharma, healthcare, insurance, these are sectors, chemical manufacturing, APIs. So these are sectors which are actually positively getting benefited because of COVID, and they will have their own tailwinds and they'll actually do much better than had COVID not impacted them.
Thank you, sir. There is question from Dakshesh. What are the particular reasons that asset classes changes year to year?
Okay. Okay. So the performance of a particular asset class has a lot to do with the factors which govern that asset class, right? So let's say, as an example, you've talked enough of equity. Let's say talk about debt, right? Why should the debt fund returns change year on year? So debt funds return is a function of the interest rates prevailing in the market. It is function of the credit risk prevailing in the market. So today RBI decides that the interest rate should come down. It will benefit the debt industry. Now suddenly, you realize that economy is now growing well, everything is hunky dory. Then RBI says, okay, now we need to lift the interest rates. When the interest rates were to be lifted, you'll suddenly have the debt funds going negative, right? At least the long duration ones, or it is not favorable to the debt markets. Or you take another, we gave an example of gold, right? I mean, gold is an asset class. In the last 40 years, there is no new mine which has got manufactured or identified. So the supply of gold is the same for the last 40 years, but the demand fluctuates from year to year, situation to situation. So every time there is crisis, all the global central banks go and buy gold, and the demand for gold goes up, and suddenly the prices of the gold go up. When the economy is in the best of the shape, then the gold prices will go down. So actually, gold and equities are inversely correlated to each other. In times of good times, when everything is hunky dory, the equities go up and the gold prices go down. At times when there is very high concern, then a gold investment looks to be much lesser risky. That does not mean that they are inversely proportional to each other, but there are forces which govern them.
Okay, thank you, sir. So there is question from there has been a sharp rise in the customer base of discount brokerage firms. How does this affect the bigger players in the space?
Very good question. And I think, as we have learned, this whole digital innovation has disrupted many things in the market, right? We were talking to a few educationists. Education is now become democratized. So if you are in a smaller city, nothing stops you sitting at home to get, let's say, the IIT tutorials done. Otherwise, you have to go to a, if there is Kota or Bombay or any of the places which are very good on IIT education, you typically have to go travel there, sit there, take a room on rent and study. Now you can sit wherever you are and still study. So democratization of education has happened in a big way. Similarly, technology has disrupted information. So now information is also democratically available to everybody. And these discount brokerages, right? And you should look at always developed markets which have a history of 50, 70 years doing this. So I think this rise of discount brokerages is a good sign, because you are getting more handy tools to invest. However, what is more important in any investment vehicle is the education or the lack of education. Discount brokerages are only a technology platform which will help you at ease of convenience. The research to back it, the investment framework to do the investments, right, will continue to be very important. India as a country, like I was telling you, has very low ownership of equities. It's only about 4 to 5% of the household income goes into equity. So the larger spread of these platforms will help more and more customers to come and get onboarded. So if you want to do basic SIPs, or if you want to do some basic investment, these platforms are giving you that opportunity, but quality investment advice of asset allocation or which stocks to buy, buying is one part of it, when to sell. So the model which we see in the future is a blended model. You will have great platforms, but you will also need human interactions to give you superior advice on what is the right thing to do. So at one end, you are having these discount brokerages also growing faster because, like I said, the penetration on equity ownership will continue to grow in India. This will also put a lot more pressure on the established broking houses to also beef up their platforms, right? So platform will be an enabler to get onboarded, but the quality of investment advice will continue to be the differentiator.
So now next question is coming from different direction. So will cryptocurrency take over the stock market in future?
So, difficult to say. There's no easy answer here because one, it is not a regulated currency. It is a very different way to say that, okay, I can buy bitcoins which are acceptable by, we've seen the disruption happening from a physical cash to credit cards, and from credit cards to Paytms and the Google Pays, right? So this is obviously one step further in the direction of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency is more a end of what the new technology disruption on blockchain is going to do. But will it replace the the way of doing business? The chances are yes, but a lot of it depends on regulations. Right now, the Indian regulation does not allow it. There are risks associated with it. And one of the things we all have learned with technology is that as the technology becomes higher, the cyber security becomes even more difficult, because all of us use social media and we know the backlash of the social media also. So when you use these digital currencies, the risk framework has to be first made robust before actually it becomes more popular.
Shall I take one more question, one or two more questions?
Yeah.
So what is your outlook on the airline industry in the short, medium, and long term?
See, the airline industry is a very high infrastructure led industry, if you look at it, because unlike let's say a new age technology industry, airlines industry employ a lot many people and it has heavy infrastructure. So the cost of the flight or the plane and the ecosystem which builds around it in terms of the maintenance, in terms of the routing, in terms of specialization. It's easy to drive a truck than driving a plane, right? So the specialization of the manpower comes into picture. It's easy to maintain a tractor than to maintain an airline, right? And then the demand in a country like India will continue to grow. So the forces of growth for the airlines are very much there in a country like India, because the government's plan is also now to through the Udan scheme connect smaller cities, right? So we had the tier 2, tier 3 cities connecting to the metros. The second phase is the tier 2, tier 3 cities connecting within themselves, right? So a tier 2 town flight moving to another tier 2 flight is a great way to increase the pie. So I am very clear that the pie of airlines or aviation in this country is only going to grow, because there are many more people who are in smaller cities, would not want to waste, particularly for business reasons or emergency reasons, and travel has become really affordable. The train travel for a second AC and a flight travel in many of the destinations is more or less now similar. At 2,000 rupees, you can travel in smaller destinations. So with the requisite infrastructure coming up, the industry's fortunes are good. However, the variables in this sector are the fuel prices, which is the biggest variable, and globally as the fuel prices go up or down, the fortunes of the industry keeps going up and down, right? I think this is frankly a more of a anecdotal phase which we are going through, where the travel is completely banned. I think sooner than later, when the skies get opened, both your domestic and international travel will only going to increase. And you see, every time we want to travel, we don't get a ticket which is, on the last minute. The airline gets fully booked, right? So I think in a country like India, to my knowledge, the airline industry is definitely, gonna increase the pie for the whole industry. The operating environment may differ depending on how cost efficient each airline is and how best they can manage their fleet management and so on and so forth.
Thank you. So how much more upside in pharma you see? Again, today pharma index was up 5%, and this is clearly the best sector in this bull run. Which other sectors you see will outperform? So this is the question from Mr. Sunny Arora. He is from our group.
Okay. So, okay, I'm not a, fund manager or a sector specialist to talk about a particular sector, but I can tell you broadly what our house view is. That, if you look at the history of IT and pharma as a sector, right, they are supposed to be the, stability sectors. So pharma actually had underperformed over the last 2 to 3 years, if you look at, go back to the history of 2, 3, 4 years, pharma sector was, and, whether it is pharma, whether it is IT, whether it is FMCG, they're supposed to be the stable, conservative sectors. Now, because of the COVID situation, yes, you'll suddenly see all the stocks, if you look at in the last 6 months, have more than doubled, right? There is increased reasoning for that. The investment into pharma research is only going to go up. However, like I gave you the example of oil in the airline industry, the fortunes of the pharma industry is also dependent a lot more on the US FDA approvals for the fund for pharma companies which export a lot of it, right? And the US FDA regulations, change pretty frequently, and therefore, but coming back to specifics on, okay, do we see a growth in the, from here on? See, pharma is about 3.5–4% of the index. It is going to grow, but financial services, let's say, is about 35 to 36% of the index. So is pharma going to replace or come closer to financial services in terms of weightage in the Nifty index? The answer is no. It will continue to be a niche sector. But yeah, there is always a room for stock specific and sector specific to grow from there.
Thanks. Thank you.
But other sectors which we feel that which can grow from here on are, healthcare more than pharma. I think the broader healthcare sector. We believe that, contract manufacturing, API manufacturing, chemical manufacturing, non-discretionary consumer-facing businesses. Insurance is one sector, organized food retailing, right? A case like a Domino's Pizza. So some of these sectors, some of these stocks are actually positively getting benefited by COVID.
So last question for growth of fintech. So your reflection on its growth, keeping COVID-19 in mind, please.
Common banking.
No, growth in fintech, your reflection on its growth, keeping COVID-19 in your mind.
Okay, so I think COVID is proven to be a accelerator of many of these, ecosystem on, the digital side, and fintechs are clearly, the beneficiaries, I must say, on one front and adversaries on the other front. The fundraising for new fintech has become a bit more challenging after COVID, right? Because, the amount of VC funding or the amount of PE funding which was coming into fintechs has slowed down. But the scope of fintech for the future is only got accelerated because of COVID. So one part is just the funding, but I think, so the way I look at it is the traditional form of, let's say as an example, let's say bank. The traditional form of banking was that you take a bank and then say, okay, the bank is a huge giant. It's not nimble enough and fast enough to change certain things. And there are a lot many players, like let's say Paytm is much more faster to do than, doing a bank transfer from one account to another account, because you just type mobile number and you can send the money, right? Now that's one innovation of payments. But when you look at banking as a vehicle, you know, there are so many new fintechs which the banks are actually using to facilitate various transactions for their clients, right? So payment options is one thing. There are now branchless loans, right? Fintech firms which are giving micro loans of 4 lakhs, 3 lakhs, and they don't even have a presence. People come, do their online KYC. Their credit scores are also calculated by some algorithm. And if you're eligible, you get a loan. There is no face-to-face discussion also, and you're expected to pay back in a certain time frame because there is a certain amount of credit check which or a history you have. So as the credit bureau in the country is going up, as the availability of information like Aadhaar and so many biometric checkups and many other things are coming for individuals, the fintech story in India is here to stay, and it will grow faster than what you've seen in the last decade. Because the rate at which machine learning, the rate at which your new technology trends. I mean, yesterday you saw there is a cloud computing company in the US, which got listed, and it got massive valuations because the revenues of that company is doubling. The profits are nowhere clear. I mean, we all know that Amazon made no money for so many years, but it continues to be the world's best market cap company, right? If you look at the top 5 stocks in the US or the global best market 5 top stocks, they were non-existent 15-20 years back. These are companies which have innovated and come and they've squashed the marketplace. So look at Reliance as an example, right? I mean, Reliance is also repositioning itself more like a digital and I mean, it got money from Facebook and Google and all that, $25 billion, not because it was a petrochemical giant and a cash cow or a monopolistic company, but because it is trying to foray into digital or trying to get into retail space today. So I think fintech story is here to stay. A lot of future there. A hell lot of innovations will happen, and it is already happening. And anybody who has to be successful, they will have to, as an organization level, imbibe all these fintechs as enablers to their business models.
Thank you, sir. So I think it looks like we have covered almost all questions. Sir, is there anything else you would like to cover before we wrap up?
No, I think it was a exciting time spent with all of you, and I think enjoyed the questions also which came in. People, I could see there was a lot of excitement to know what all various questions are there. So I hope I've answered all their questions.
Yeah, so I would like to invite my student Rishu. She is second year student of the program. Rishu, is you there?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. It was a very fascinating and engaging session. I would like to thank Mr. Somvanshi for taking out his precious time and putting up his efforts in enlightening us with the best of his knowledge on how can we make smart investment during this period. So far, what we learned from you is that during a situation like COVID-19 pandemic, what is a reaction we normally receive? Normally, people would think of selling everything, or they'll think what has to be the basic investing cycle or rule that they need to follow. So what you explained and what we learned is the 4 basic investing rules. The first is the diversify and rebalance. History of past many years shows that no asset class is consistent, and so what is the right thing to do in such a situation is the best is to choose right asset allocation plan. A disciplined asset allocation smoothens the investment journey. Second rule is invest with good quality funds. Best performing funds in 1 year does not need to be the best in subsequent block of years. A good consistent performance, it happens over a longer period of time, which leads to wealth creation driven by scales. And equity returns comes on exponential basis. You told us 4C framework for equity manager selection that helps in the best winning managers. The third rule you told us is invest time in the market. You told us about the best months. You told us that how time reduces volatility with the example of journey of Nifty 50 for 26 years. The fourth rule that you told us is buy low and sell high. Funds are underperforming, and so smart way is to stay off the emotional roller coaster. There comes a point euphoria, which means a point of maximum financial risk and maximum interest. And you told us about the curve, hope, relief, and optimism, which is not always controllable. There comes a situation of panic to depression that leads to loss of the patients. And at the last, you told that we do not have to be smarter to invest, but we have to be more disciplined to invest. And for saving, we need to be pessimistic, and for investing, we need to be optimistic. And last but not the least, a big thanks to all our guests and participants who contributed their time and effort in making this event a success. Thank you all. Thank you, sir. Over to you, Amit.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much. On my own behalf, I extend a very hearty thank to you for gracing your important work and sharing with us your experience and opinions for that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Vishalji. Thank you so much.